All right. Hi, everyone. Can you hear me okay at the back? Yeah? All right. If I start mumbling, then tell me to shout at me or wave at me or something, and I'll speak louder. I'm going to talk a little bit about dependency tech debt, or more precisely, how to handle conversations about dependency technical debt with a tool called Libyear. But first, a little bit about me. And why, sort of some context of why I seem to spend a lot of time thinking about this. My name is David. I'm head of engineering at an agency called Pixie Labs. We're a digital product agency based here in London, actually literally just around the corner, which was very convenient. We've been going for about 10 years. There's 6 of us. And we design and develop digital products, everything from an internal platform for a FTSE 100 company to manage the installation of smart home devices. We help funded startups bring their products to life. And we once actually made a typewriter type by itself when you tweeted at it for Twitter as part of an art installation, which was really cool. And Ruby and Ruby on Rails especially has always been kind of part of our DNA. In fact, all of those projects, even the typewriter, had some kind of Ruby and Ruby on Rails involved in it. And I kind of live and breathe it. I've been using Ruby on Rails and Ruby since 2006. When I picked up a copy of Agile Web Dev with Ruby on Rails. I don't know if anyone else, that was their starting point. It's a great book. So yeah, like 17 years now. And thinking about projects at Pixie Labs, there's a couple of things. Like we have a lot of our clients have been with us for a long time, and we support them and support the projects that we've worked on with them. We also rescue a lot of projects, where people come to us and they need some help getting things back up and running or up to date or whatever it is. And in both of those situations, an important component, right, is managing dependencies and out-of-date dependencies, whether it's looking after something or rescuing something. So that's why I kind of spend a bit of time thinking about, as an agency, like what is the best way to do that? How can we have good conversations about that? So I wanted to tell you a little bit about some techniques that we have found really helpful. So hands up. Who's upgraded a dependency on a project today? Anyone? No one today. What about this week? Anyone updated anyone? One person. Hands up who recently has tried to upgrade something but has got stuck in some horrendous upgrade rabbit hole of dependencies. Yeah. I'm actually trying to migrate an app right now to some new infrastructure that I can't get Ruby 2.7 installed on because it's a new version of Ubuntu, and the app is Rails 5, and I need to get it all the way up to Rails 6, and yeah, it's a mess. Has anyone heard of Libyear? Oh, thank God, I was worried that everyone was going to put their hands up. I'm like, okay, well, I'm done. Is everyone familiar with the term tech debt? Is that something people are familiar with? All right. If you're not, I kind of like to think about it really focusing on that word debt, right? You're kind of taking a loan of time by doing something that is maybe less technically correct than you would like or than you should do, and then you're kind of paying interest on that loan forevermore in the form of time, right? And with dependencies, if you've got out-of-date dependencies, really old dependencies, that might be new devs coming on the project, taking ages to get set up because they've got a new machine and the dependencies won't install, or maybe this one catches me out every time. You open the documentation for some library and you're reading it and you think you know what you're reading, and then you realize that you're on the version behind and you're reading the wrong documentation. How many hours have I lost to that? And obviously bugs as well, right? Just bugs in old libraries. So yeah, this is how we kind of see things a lot at Pixie Labs, and I'm sure you do too, right? We all know that we should be keeping dependencies up to date for security, for bug fixes, new functionality that we can make use of, performance improvements, and also just our own happiness, right? We all like to be using the latest version of things. It means you're learning new stuff. It means that you're keeping up to date. Also, you can I find if you're more up to date, you're engaging with the open source community a bit more, right? Because you're more likely to be maybe saying, hey, there's a missing changelog, or I found a bug in the latest version. So you're also kind of helping to contribute as well, which is just a nice feeling, and we all like to do that. So we all know that, whatever is flat, whatever is it Microsoft Auto Update at the back there, bouncing around, or whatever. But in my experience, and maybe yours as well, like, there's kind of, typically we all update dependencies because maybe there's some new features that are in that library that will unlock or speed up work. But that often it's hard to get buy-in, right? Maybe you're working on, my favorite example is like adding some real-time function to a Rails project back in the days of when Rails 5 had just come out and there was Action Cable. And maybe a feature request comes in to add something real-time and you're like, great, should upgrade to Rails 5 so we can use Action Cable. But like, it's really, the feature is to add something real-time, and now you're trying to pitch for a Rails 5 upgrade, which is a huge piece of work. And it just kind of inflates the work, and in the end, it's very difficult to kind of get buy-in to do that. A lot of the time, I think we end up updating dependencies because there's some critical security vulnerability that everyone is terrified about. That's stressful AF, right? Like, you really do not want to be updating dependencies in that situation. So that's when you discover you're like way behind, and you've also got to make some changes at the same time as the security vulnerability. It's horrendous. Maybe also stuff goes end of life, right? You've really reached the end of the road then, and now you're updating dependencies. You're always kind of playing catch up in that situation. Or maybe you're trying to add a new library and it's incompatible with some old library. And now that can really throw your estimates. If you've worked out, you're like, I'm going to use this library to do this piece of work, and then now you can't because you got some old version. I can't solve all of these problems, but I can help with some of them. And I think the reason why it's like doing the right thing is hard. It is really hard to just keep dependencies up to date on a project. One of them is that I find that it's hard to describe it and kind of quantify the benefits to stakeholders, right? It can sound like fear-mongering if you're like, well, if we don't update dependencies, there's going to be some security thing that's going wrong, and it just sounds like you're kind of just trying to pitch for some work that you want to do for fun. I think a good team and a good business will understand the value to customers and the business, but it can be hard to explain. There's always something else to do as well that isn't dependencies. There's always other tech debt. It's hard enough to pitch for tech debt, let alone to just be like, we should just update some dependencies. I think it's also hard to know where to focus efforts. If you've got 2, 5, 10 code bases and you've got an hour to do some dependency updates, which one do you pick? Which code base do you pick to do some updates on? And I think it's hard to know what's good or not. Are you okay? Like, is it okay that you're on Rails 6.1 or 5.3 or whatever? Or any of the libraries, not just Rails. And also, like, not just is it okay for you, but also are you catching up? Are you falling further behind? I think the delta of kind of where you're at and whether you're improving or getting worse is important. Libyear doesn't solve all of these, but it does help make some of these conversations simpler. And it makes it a little bit easier to kind of establish a process, I found anyway. So what is it? It's not very complex. It really just gives you a number, a single number for measuring dependency freshness. You basically just take the number of years between the release that you're on of every library and the latest release, and you add them all up. And it gives you a number, right? And that sounds really straightforward, but actually, and you can do it for it has different languages. It has a Ruby version, a Python version, PHP version. And actually, I can show you just to, there's a gem to install, which is Libyear bundler. I've already got it installed, so I'm not going to do it. This is actually one of my, this is that project that I was talking about, that I'm trying to upgrade. And it gives you, the Ruby version actually gives you all of your dependencies and all of their, the gap between for each one, which is kind of cool. But you can see for this one, this is my old project. It's 341 Libyears behind. It's not as bad. It's not actually, the delta of the difference is more important, I promise. But to give you an example, I've got another project here. A little plug for a thing called Train Track. If you travel by train, I built an app called Train Track for easily looking at whether trains are delayed or not. This one is a lot newer, right? So it's only 100 years behind, Libyears behind, instead of 300 Libyears. So if these were two projects that I was working on, then it's like, sure, I could look and I can see, yeah, it's pretty obvious. One is Rails 5 and one is Rails 7. But even without that, like, this is just useful to just be like, immediately you're like, okay, one of these is better than the other. And if I could maybe work on one project to kind of get it more towards the other one. And yeah, you can do this for Ruby, PHP, Python, etc. Oh, these are my screenshots in case I didn't have my terminal with me, but I do. Excuse me with all my paper. All right. So thinking back to those problems, like, it seems really simple. But if you think back to some of those problems, it helps you know where to focus, because it means that you can compare code bases, right, and see which one is in a better state than the other. You can also set a threshold, right? You can say, we're not going to do any dependency updates on projects, on code bases that have a Libyear of 200 or lower, right? You can just be like, it doesn't matter. That's okay. That's good enough. We don't need to worry about that one for now. And also, you can kind of game the system, and within the project, you can pick the oldest dependency that has the biggest gap and start with that one, right? It sounds kind of silly, but if you're not doing any dependency updates, then starting with the oldest one with the biggest gap is like a good way of kind of motivating you to do a bit of this. It can also help you understand what's good or not. Again, as I said, like, I think it's better to understand, to maybe on your projects, measure this over time, right? So this month, what's our Libyear? Next month, what's our Libyear? And as we're adding dependencies or doing some updates or making some changes, is that getting worse or better? Do we need to spend more time updating dependencies, or actually are things going okay because we've done a big refactor and we've thrown away a whole bunch of dependencies and now we're in a better spot? But you can also decide maybe what a good Libyear score is, to help you understand whether to do some dependency updates now or postpone it for later. You can maybe compare, if you're in a larger organization, you could compare against other teams, kind of see, how is the stuff that we're looking after doing compared to others. You can compare maybe to other organizations. I will show you the Libyear on some of our client projects so you can get an idea. And maybe you can just pick a code base that feels fresh and use that as kind of your yardstick or something like that. The stakeholder buy-in one is quite tricky. I think that having, like, if you think about some of those hard to understand reasons, like for someone who's maybe less technical, that you're trying to convince we should do some dependency updates, we need to get on top of this, and you're giving sort of technical reasons or hard to understand reasons, you can kind of add an easy to understand number. You can say, here's two code bases, this one is 500 Libyears behind this other code base. It's pretty clear, like, okay, this one's in a worse state than that one based on this stuff. You could also potentially use it to draw some conclusions about why it's worthwhile. If you've got some code base that everything seems to go right for, and everything is all smooth, and there's never any regressions, and there's never any bugs, and it has a much lower Libyear score than some other project, you can say, well, that's partially why. We need to get that other project up to scratch in order for it to run smoother than it is now. And I think earlier conversations, it's an easy conversation starter, right? Like having this number, having something very straightforward when you're talking about dependencies, can help kind of facilitate some earlier conversations rather than those last minute, there's a security issue, it's something's end of life, or we've got some big problem. So I think that that's useful too. This was one of the other things, right? There's always something else to do. If you haven't got it, you probably should focus on good automated test coverage first. If you have good automated test coverage, then it becomes really easy to do dependency updates. Is anyone familiar with Dependabot on GitHub or something similar?
Yeah.
Right. So that idea, right, of Dependabot telling you that there's an update and it runs your tests, hopefully, they pass, hopefully, and you can merge it in. Like that obviously is chipping away at your Libyear, right? So how much are you using Libyear will help you understand how effective is Dependabot being for your project, which I think is really cool. So yeah, doing a dependency a day, that's something that we do at Pixie Labs. This screenshot on the right is a reminder that we have every day. We have like a support rota, one engineer's on support a day. And one of their obligations is to find a dependency that they think is going to be okay to do, merge it in and deploy it to prod. But I think also like, don't even try and do major upgrades, right? Not just Rails, but anything that's a major upgrade. Yeah. Is everyone familiar with semantic versioning as a thing, right? Where you've got like your version numbers are major, minor, and patch, right? Yeah. So any major version, probably don't try and do it, right? And instead, actually schedule that, right? Put it as a ticket, or however you're doing project management, actually be like, we've got to get Sidekick from 4 to 5, right? And it's like a thing, and here's what we've got to do. Here's what the changelog says we need to do. Don't just try and do those ones, skip them. Do the minor and patch ones. All right. Here's some example Libyear scores for some of our projects. The JavaScript ones are kind of interesting because I found this out when I did this, but the JavaScript version of Libyear doesn't do the whole dependency tree. Unless you are using PNPM or Yarn v2, which I'm not using. But like looking at I've anonymized these, we don't have clients actually called Echo. But looking at like the ones in bold with the same client, right? This is interesting in that we've got this kind of customer facing Rails monolith, and then we've got a couple of internal Rails apps. And that customer facing one is way behind compared to the internal tools, right? So if conversations start to come up about, hey, we're going to spend some time doing some tech there, we'll be like, well, like we've got some work to do on that customer facing one, right? We don't even need to have a conversation about how things are looking on the other two. Let's get that customer facing one in a better place, right? So just very easy to point at and just have some conversations about. I actually also I have this for real somewhere, but like this is where we've taken that report from Libyear, and I don't know how well you can see that, but broken out every gem and then sorted it by oldest, biggest Libyear gap to smallest, and also filtered out anything that is major, right? So that we can kind of focus on the minor ones and then maybe come back to the major upgrades. And actually, after we did this on this particular client, there was a Redis upgrade that we had to do on Heroku for this client, which went smoother because we had done this upgrade. We were a little bit further ahead than some of our other projects. There was also, it's always Heroku. There was a stack upgrade on Heroku, which was simpler on this project compared to some of the other projects. So kind of getting ahead and doing a bit of this was a lot easier than kind of coming to it when Heroku were like, you got to do it, the deadline's coming up. Yeah. That's it. Hopefully that was useful. I think we're doing joint questions.